Brace yourselves, for there will be nostalgia. I guarantee within an hour of publishing this video, there will be thousands of sudden reinstalls of Baldur's Gate all over the world. I am 37 years old, so I'm kind of legally required to consider Baldur's Gate one of the best of all time. Even if I weren't, I still would. To me, in my headcanon, the aesthetic of Dungeons & Dragons is Baldur's Gate. It was captured perfectly there. So, the visual assets from the game files are a goldmine for terrain inspiration. Now, when you think medieval building, medieval tavern, you probably think of something like this. Very specific color palette, the upper levels sort of jut outwards as you go up, and lots of use of architectural timbers. Now, that is not what I am interested in today. The style you see in the game is very different. There's a lot of flat shapes. A lot of the textures are just sort of this nebulous, blotchy gray or beige or tan. And the interiors can be very warm and cozy, but for the most part, when you're outside walking through a city, it's fairly desaturated. So I did a little experiment this week. I put together 3 buildings from the game and some modular road tiles to tie it all together. My conclusions and my decisions evolve throughout what'll be the next, I think it's like a half hour, but we'll just save that for the narration. Let's go to the workshop table. And remember that our sponsor is Heroes Horde for you 3D printers out there. Excellent selection, including all True Tiles lines. I'll start with the modular road tiles. Truth be told, I made a whole set of them before deciding I didn't like the design, but I'll show you that first batch anyway. I have these MDF 4-inch square hardboard squares, the same kind I used for my dungeon tiles. You could just as easily use cardboard, and you'll see that is what I'm going to do later. Anyways, the walkways flanking the road path itself will be cobblestone, so I'm using foam, except it seems that every Dollar Tree is out of stock of ready board. Maybe our hobby is just getting out there that much. So I switched from foam board to XPS foam, milled that down, and used my homemade jigs to get the right quarter circle pieces. So on this 4-inch square, the road will be 2 inches wide, and the walkways are 1 inch on each side. Here's a texture roller from Green Stuff World. It's meant for, well, green stuff and clay, but you can use it on foam. You've just got to press really hard and then know how to paint it. I'll get into that in a little bit. But after doing my dungeon tiles, I was like, I do not have the time in my life to manually carve every cobblestone on all these tiles. So I'm going to texture roller it. About then is when it dawned on me that 2 inches wide for a road is like half as wide as it should be. In a city like Baldur's Gate, I would think 2 caravans, 2 horse-pulled wagons, should be able to pass each other in opposing directions. So I spent a week trying to convince myself this was okay before ultimately starting over. I cleaved off all that foam I had prepared, and I'll reuse these squares sometime later. Anyway, the form factor I'm going to go with is a 6-inch tile, 4-inch wide road. The foundations are going to be double corrugated cardboard. It's right after the holiday season here. I've got tons of leftover boxes that stuff came in. And this nice 1/4-inch thick double corrugated stuff is manna from heaven. So I cut these down to 6 inches exactly. If you need help cutting cardboard with precision and getting results like this, I made a video a couple years ago. I'll link it on screen. Now, for years I have talked about corrugation cladding. So hot gluing cardstock onto the side of the corrugation to cover it up, make it nice and pretty. But I'm going to take a page out of Dungeon Master Gareth's book. Here is some painter's tape, and it's a really wide roll, so I can actually double up what I get from it by slicing it in half. But anyway, I'm going to attach this to one side. I'm still going to fill it with hot glue just for strength, but then cover the side with tape. The tape doesn't have incredibly strong adhesive by design. I mean, that's its purpose, but it's good enough to hold on to cardboard. And I'm sold. No more corrugation cladding. Tape from now on. This is about 10 times faster, and I don't have to remember to cut the foundation a little bit small to account for the thickness of the cardstock. Love it. Moving on. Graphics medium chipboard. This is the grayish brownish stuff you find at the back of a legal pad, but you can buy it in bulk like I do if you want. There's links in the video description below. Conveniently, the stuff I buy comes in these 12 by 12 inch sheets. So I cut that into exact quarters, 6 inches. To that, I hot glue my foam pathways and then texture them up with the roller. I attached them to the chipboard first because if the foam was on the double corrugated, the immense pressure that I apply with the roller crushes the corrugation. That did happen. So attach it to the chipboard first, then I'm going to hot glue it onto the foundation. The other reason to have this extra chipboard layer is just rigidity. The more layers of materials you have put together, the less likely it is to warp. and you'll see by the end these have zero warp. They're heavy and they're real strong. Not shown on camera, but I flocked with sand, so white PVA glue followed by construction sand, and let that dry overnight. Now, to paint the walkways, terracotta. Do something a little different here. 2 solid coats because it's a cheap craft paint. And here's a color called Gray Owl. I'm gonna use it to pick out a few random stones, maybe 1 per square inch or so, something like that. Now earlier I talked about painting textured foam. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Ink. Here's some red, yellow, and black. I'm gonna mix 50-50 red and yellow, and then a couple drops of black, along with some matte medium. Not water, but matte medium. You can get this at any crafting store. It's not very expensive. It's basically colorless paint. I'm making, well, it's not a wash, but like a shade. I don't know what you call it, but it's to provide depth and shadow to the walkway. Now, if I had watered down this ink or even paint with water, it would have been far too runny, and what you'll see is on these textured foam bits that have that roller applied, the water runs very easily, especially since it's been painted on top. It just can't absorb in, and you'll see the finished product is very splotchy. By using matte medium, the mixture has a lot of legs. It doesn't really want to flow anywhere, so you'll get a tinting effect, and you'll get it pooling in the cracks between the stones. I'm very happy to have stumbled upon this. I've avoided using those green stuff rollers on foam for years because the washed part at the end never really looks right. I don't get the depth that I want, but now I do. Use matte medium. And you can see I played a little more with the color, darkened it a bit, and ultimately ended up with a color called brown. Just use brown ink. That's what I wanted to do, but I ran out yesterday, so I had to mix it up myself. After that's dry, it's time to paint the gravel. I'll try this gray owl color again. Having a nice doused wet brush helps it to capillary action sink into all of that sand. And look at that. Wow, I hate this. We're going to try a different color. I'm going to go with a tan. I was trying to get creative, go with that generic grayish splotchiness that the Baldur's Gate aesthetic has, but I don't know. Maybe I should have given this a better chance, but I didn't. I'm going more conventional. Light beige color to dry brush it after it's totally dry. Here's a side-by-side showing the significance of the difference. And then a wash with a medium brown. This is just water and paint, very watered down, like 1 part paint to 10 parts water. And this I do want to flow. Want it to settle out, want it to be splotchy, have areas of randomness, make it look like a mucked up city road. After painting the edges black, they're ready. Using the near infinity extraction tool, I looked through the game's files. Picked a random section of Baldur's Gate itself, and for some reason honed in on this little house right here. Let's build that. The skeleton of the building I did with double corrugated cardboard, because it's readily available to me, it's very durable, and it's easy to cut. All my buildings will have a footprint in multiples of 6 inches. This building is going to be a 6 by 6 inch square. Others might be 6 by 12 inches or 12 by 12 inches. This way I know my road tiles will always fit around them, and I'll get a pure modular city with no gaps. So these are assembled with hot glue, and then I clad the outside with graphics medium chipboard. Now this, in my opinion, is the secret sauce here. First of all, side note, I made the skeleton about 3 millimeters smaller than it should be, and that's because of the thickness of the chipboard that's going to go on the outside. So the overall product has a footprint of 6 inches. Just, if you build this and you do it this way, take that into account. Anyways, the great thing about chipboard is that it has such a fuzzy, fibrous texture to it. It drinks in paint, it gives you automatic texture, and as you'll see in a minute, it's so easy to fake like a stucco look on it, and to fake a lot of detail from what is basically just a flat surface. So the entire outside gets covered up. I attach some cross beams at the top, which will support the roof, then more chipboard for the roof. Next up, to get it drying, I applied the first of 2 coats of a cream color to the whole body of the building. If you're using these cheap acrylic craft paints, you will need 2 coats to get a solid color. While that's drying, I decided to prep some shingles. I've covered this many times on the channel before, but just to reiterate, I like to use cereal box cardstock or something of that thickness. Cut out 1/2 inch strips, and with scissors, cut about 2/3 of the way through it, every few millimeters or so, going all the way down. If you lever one of the scissors on your fingertip, you'll find that you have a lot more control and you can move extremely fast. I think I did this entire roof in less than half an hour. And optionally, I only did this part for this building, but every few shingles, snip away 1 millimeter or 2 of them. Just gives a little more variation. Beginning with the bottom row, I hot glued these on, overlapping about half each time. Once I got to the peak of the roof, I lopped off all the excess, very satisfying step. And that's one side done. Another 20 minutes to do the other side, and then the roof cap itself, I just used some small rectangles overlapping each other to cover up that seam at the top. Thin bead of hot glue in there, pressed down, will spread out nicely, and this is going to be very strong. And now let's play with the windows. Again, to cereal box cardstock, cut some squares out, and then boom, wood products. I got coffee stirrers and crafting picks from Michael's. You really can't go wrong, just small wood of any sort. I cut these and glue these on as a window frame, and a little decorative piece in the middle there, and then stain these up. Since I don't care about consistency from building to building in this city, and I actually want them to look chaotic and different, I can experiment with different browns and different ways of painting the wood. So I'm using Army Painter Mid-Brown this time around, and then blacking out the inside of the window. And now I'm gluing them on. It turns out that this isn't the best order to do things. Should have shaded the wall first, but we'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, let's step back to the roof. This color is called Tapestry Wine. Very fancy. Solid coat of this on the roof. Again, 2 coats because it's a cheap craft paint. Look at this, pink seashell. Gonna do some dry brushing. Now I'll tell you, a wash is coming next. So whenever you're gonna wash over a dry brush, it's okay, and you want that dry brush to be a bit brighter than you'd expect. It's gonna get dulled down significantly. And don't be afraid to use a pretty saturated color. This is sort of a saturated pink. It's not hot pink, but it's not as pale as it looks on camera. And I'm dry brushing upwards, always upwards, never downwards, so that it catches the edges of those shingles, and we get almost a stylized, like, cartoonish effect, maybe? I don't know, but against the grain, always dry brushing upwards. Now we've got 2 tones, and we're gonna add a third. Back to the tapestry wine, and we'll put in a little amount, like, yeah, that much. And then my matte medium again, this much? I guess it's like 2 parts matte medium to 1 part paint. And I am gonna treat it to just a couple of drops of water, just a teeny little bit. And lastly, I'm gonna scrape some black paint there onto the brush. Not much. A little bit of black paint goes a long way to darken up a solution. So I mix that up and test the viscosity on the edge of the cup inside there. Looks good. Slather it on the roof. Now with this technique, you may find that the mixture is a little rich. You can see that I go right back to the water cup. Always keep a water cup nearby. Dunk the brush, bring it back, and slurry it around on the roof itself, and you have plenty of working time. This is an art, not a science. You gotta experiment a little bit to find out what works. But I'm letting this shot run a little long so you can see the consistency I'm going for. Now, notice it looks a bit purple, and it looks a little bit like milky. That's just because of the matte medium. When it dries, it will be much darker and clearer. I do this a lot later on in this video. You'll see more examples of how the mixture doesn't look good, it looks milky, but it dries wonderfully. And you can see this mixture is crammed up under the edges of all the shingles. That's what I want. That's where the shadow should be. If I had mixed this mostly with water, that would have run down. It would not be staying there like it does with the matte medium. So I just leave that overnight to dry. And coming back, here it is. Doesn't that look wonderful? I mean, it's not realistic or professional by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's really wonderfully stylized. And you can't beat the effort. It was like 5 total minutes of effort, excluding dry time waiting, to paint this roof. Could not be happier with how it came out. Alright, other features on this building. I'm going to take some foam and another green stuff world roller. This is the bricks. Give it a texture, paint it gray, and wash it with black. Then I'm going to attach some pre-stained wood bits on it. Just frame it out so it looks like it does in the picture. And once again, being fearless. Not worried about reproducibility. This wood looks a little bleached out, so I'm going to add another layer of wash to it. I don't even remember what color this was. I'm just going for it. I placed the building up against a road tile because all the features like the doors need to be about a 1/2 inch up so that they can butt up flush against all the road tiles. So I use the road tile itself as a jig to attach the door. Here's some more cereal box. These triangles are getting covered with white glue and then coffee stirrers attached. A little bit of pressure, in about 20 minutes that's dry, and I can cut away the excess. Now what I'm reproducing is this bit right here. Notice that whitewashed or grayed wood. It's not brown. So I'm going to take some watered down gray paint and slather it all over this piece. A little bit much, so dab away with the paper towel. Voila. Doesn't need to be complicated. Lastly, I took a medium gray, doesn't really matter what it is, just a medium gray, watered down heavily, like, again, 10 parts water to 1 part paint, or even waterier than that. And earlier I mentioned doing things out of order. What I really should have done is this whole wash first, then glued on the windows and all the features. It would have been a lot easier. I was hoping that the gray would pool around the edges of all the features and give some ambient occlusion, but it ended up not really mattering. And in the next building I do, you'll see it really doesn't matter. You get a great look anyway. So I'm letting this shot run a little long. Notice how watered down the gray is. That's how it should be. And there's all that texture, those striations. That is the chipboard doing the work for you. That's the fibrous texture underneath the base coat showing through now. Tons of micro detail doing that work for us and giving us that splotchy, undefinable look that the Baldur's Gate aesthetic has. Here, I'll show you another side. I'm gonna slop this on there. It's a little bit rich, get some water, thin it out. It's an art, not a science, etc., and just work around until you're happy with it. I then realized that I hated the way these windows looked. The spike thing in the middle was a dumb idea, so I tore those out and prepped some new inserts. On some cereal box, I ripped very thin, like 2mm wide strips and glued those on in a hatching scheme, blacked out the whole thing, painted the hatches with brown, and inserted those into the existing windows. I like this look much better. It's also a little truer to the source image. So this is the first building for the day. What do you think? Did I nail it? I think I nailed it. It's also the first building that I built, and I learned a few things from it as far as technique and efficiency, so we're going to apply that going forward. Look at this building. I like this building. Let's build this building. Much of the fundamentals here are the same as before, so I'm not going to repeat a lot of stuff. It's a double corrugated skeleton, hot glued together, and clad with chipboard on the outside. Now for this shape of roof, which is a little more complex than the last one, you don't actually have to do any trigonometry. You can use your ruler, and whatever you make your peaks, you just use the ruler to determine what size the 2 trapezoids should be, and then the triangles on the end. You'll see in a moment here how I attached all those. But it also helps to have a roof rise over run that's identical. That's what I did here, 3 inches up, 3 inches over. So the triangle bits mounted in the middle, those rafters, those triangles are 6 inches wide and 3 inches tall. Here's some nice music. I'll be back in just a minute. Now the base cream color here is a different shade than the other building, because I want no buildings to look alike. And this time, like I said, I'm going to wash it ahead of time. I'm using a rich brown color, heavily watered down. And for this next little bit, I'm going to let these shots run long so you can see in real time how I work it. You don't have to panic, you don't have to rush, but this stuff does start to dry and set pretty quickly on this chipboard. So I like to have a paper towel on hand and start doing some dabbing. And eventually I move from dabbing into smearing and sort of working the wash off of the main areas and leaving it at the perimeters. This gives it that sort of windswept, aged, stucco look, kind of, a little bit. Well, it's halfway there. You'll see what we do to get all the way there in a minute. While I'm waiting on that to dry, and it does need to be bone dry, we're going to dry brush the roof. So again, here's a saturated, brilliant light blue color, upwards only, always upwards on the roof. By the way, the base color of the roof was English navy, and for the wash down, I'm using a different blue. This is midnight blue. It's got a slight greenish tint to it. sort of like what we see in the source image. So once again, this gets mixed with matte medium and just a couple drops of water and slathered all over the roof. Cram it up underneath the edge of the shingles to make the shadow. If it's too rich, a few more drops of water won't hurt. And you can see how this is just gorgeously tinting all the shingles to look almost exactly like that source image. Love it. Now, I still wasn't totally happy with the body of the building, so this color is called Cocoa. It's a very dark, desaturated brown, kind of a nasty brown. But I'm going to mix up another light wash with it and just repeat the process. Now, for those of you who are thinking you want to try this, I can foresee the frustration, so I'm going to let this shot run long again, just so you can see I don't do it perfect either. I'm going back and forth to the water cup, I'm dabbing, I'm reapplying, I'm working it till I'm happy with it. You just got to keep in motion. As long as you keep it damp, you should be all right. So here's my process. And there, get a look at that. What two tones can do for us. So easy and so rewarding. Look at that. And compared to the other side with just the light brown, this is the way to go. Chipboard, folks. Makes you look better than you are. And we're going to gloss over the next bit here. I'm going to cut some slabs of foam, texture them to look like stone, and paint them gray. And these will be placed strategically to cover up all those seams where chipboard meets chipboard at the corners. This will hide them and at the same time make it look like our source image. Once they were all glued on, then I washed them with a dark, like a black or a brown, I can't remember. A little bit bleeds onto the face of the building, that's fine. I have a second paintbrush in hand and I'm just wicking it away. If some splays out, it's okay. Just spread it. More wearing. Looks good. No worries. Once again, I've got cereal box and I'm spreading out some white glue, attaching some coffee stirrers, and cutting my door. The doors have a curved top. I'm using a compass to draw that out. It's totally possible to cut these on a curve with many light passes, light pressure on the knife. Do not try to get it in one go. It takes 7 or 8 passes, but it will go through cleanly. You can cut curved wood. Here is a square wooden dowel. I'm just going to stain it up like the other stuff and put it in those nacelles at the bottom, the sitting areas. All right, now the new thing for this building. Here is some more cardstock. This is equivalent to a cereal box. It's thin stuff. And this is a goldish yellow. It's not a sun yellow. It's got a nice gold hue to it. I'm going to apply a solid coat of it. I needed 2 applications. Then I'm measuring out my windows. I need 28 of them total for the building, 14 per side. And I know they'll be 1 inch wide, so I'm drawing that out. Then I'm using another piece of cardstock to mask off the rest of them as I spray on a dark yellowish brown. I think it's called plague brown or sulfurous brown or something like that. Whatever, it's a darker, richer yellowish brown. And this will simulate the cozy illumination coming from inside the room. And now for the tedious part. The wood products to make the window frames. I pre-cut these and then painted them. That way all the fresh ends that are exposed when you cut it will already be painted and I won't have to do any touch-up later. I can't do any touch-up because these are going to be glued directly onto those yellow rectangles. And because of the gradient there, I'm going to be unable to do any repairs later. So I've got to have the wood in its final state before it goes on. That desaturated cocoa color really is nice. I like that. Junk brush with some white PVA glue such as Elmer's to attach all of these wooden members and create the window frames. Yes, very nice. And I did prep and experiment with some granny grading, but it hides all that yellow gradient and to make it blend in is going to be more, I don't like it. I'm just not going to do it. I did use a ruler to ensure these were all spaced equally along the 11 inches of free room I had on there. And that was that. This building is done. I like this building more than the first building. What do you think of this building? Leave a comment. I imagine this will be an inn, unlike the first house, which was probably just a normal residence. And we'll get plenty more glamour shots of this at the end with the whole city assembled, but let's move on to the next building. Searching about the city again, I found these open-air temples. I'm going to build one of those. The only new thing really I have for this is, normally for columns like that, I would take some single corrugated cardboard from any cardboard box, peel the paper off one side, and there you go. But that's a ton of work and it's very tedious. And it's only a few bucks for this pack of 30 sheets of it, so I'm done with that. I also bought some hole punches to give a rapid and reliable shape to wrap that corrugated paper around, but they broke after about 10 punches. I think chipboard is just too much for them. So I switched to using a wooden dowel as a guide. Construction of this one was a little trickier than the others. The roof rise over run is not even, and it's got those two eaves on the short ends. But ultimately, everything is going to be covered by shingles or other decor anyway, so the beauty of this is that the double corrugated skeleton doesn't have to be pretty. You're going to be able to hide everything. Trying to stay true to the source image, it looks like beige with gray splotchiness, so I literally used a color called beige for a base coat, and then this is a matte medium glazing with gray paint. You can see how it's going on pretty thinly, but it's not running down the column like it would if it were watered down. For the roof, I kind of screwed up. I ended up too blue. I wanted it to be more of a steely grayish blue like it is in the source image, but I'm not lamenting it too badly. And I definitely didn't go and repaint it after the post-production of this video. This was a fun piece to build. Painting, it didn't come out quite as I had hoped, but you can always repaint. It also needs some decorative glyphs and holy symbols and stuff like that. I'll tackle that in the future. So here's what I've made so far. And this was just in a fever pitch of a week, germ of an idea, all came about very quickly. So I already know that the roads aren't quite what I'm looking for. I think what this scene is missing is some green. And in fact, that's what it looks like from the game. So I'm wrestling with, am I trying to recreate Baldur's Gate or am I building stuff inspired by Baldur's Gate? I'm not gonna make any rash decisions right now. And maybe the answer is no roads at all, just a big cobblestone battle map. Of course, if I go that route, all these features are set a half-inch up from the bottom, so if I just let them out there free-floating, they're gonna look kind of silly. If I stick with road tiles, I know I need some that are just like open, so no road, just pure red cobblestone or whatever it is, to give a town square area, maybe a pop-up shopping mart or a fountain or something. Also, I only made 15 tiles. I need to basically double that. Although, as I'm sitting here recording this narration, this very moment, I'm thinking no road tiles at all might be the way to go. I'll have to play around with that in the next video. So this is a good start. Usually I get analysis paralysis. I decided to plow ahead in this project and not spend too long on any step. There's going to be some backpedaling, some changes, but I expect to do several videos, maybe a lot of videos about this kind of stuff in the future. Baldur's Gate, Baldur's Gate 2, and the expansions are enormous. I could spend an entire lifetime crafting it. So thanks for watching today. If this is the first video of mine you've found, there's a large backlog of D&D crafting stuff to check out. Also find us on Facebook, the Tabletop Crafters Guild, over 40,000 members doing this sort of thing. Till next time, I am Wylock. Make things and play games.